Hello everyone. Today's topic is about structural dimension as one of the dimension of the public management. I already explained before in last classes. So today I'm going to cover briefly chapter 5 and of the textbook and the Monihan's article. So basic concept of this class is about the structural dimensions. So according to the author, the structural dimension of public management describe the formal wall delegation specific responsibility to designated organizations and officials. So there are for me restriction and limitation, formal policy that define the roles and activities that should be performed or that may be performed by public managers or public employees. For the structural dimension really does have a backbone in a system. So constraint and relationship among individuals, among tasks, or among offices in the public sector through two primary dimensions. There are those policies or structures more accurately that constrain activity, and there are those policy or structure that enable activities. That the difference here is that a constraint is really a prohibition as a limitation. So it sets the boundaries within which we are allowed to work and simply say, on those boundaries. But on the other hand, I already mentioned that enabling structure is one that defines area where discretion is permissible areas where public manager and employees can use their own judgment to make sense in a situation or to resolve a problem. And so we think about structure now. So today's chapter is about to understand the structure shaped incentives because the structure can affect public manager incentives and decision making and actions of public manager and frontline employees, and to understand how structure influences managerial their strategies and actions in practice. So next, the structural dimension, we will discuss the meaning first and then distinction between constraining and enabling structure. I already mentioned it, and strict bureaucracy was then for in public sector as well as their management capacity and structural configuration according to the several scholars in PA field and structural reforms and changes so on. So what's the meaning of structure in public management? There are several definitions according to the scholars. I want to explain a few of them. So James Thompson, he's a great scholar in PA field. He mentioned that structure is defined as the major components of a complex organization. So they further segmented or departmentalized, and the connections are established within and between departments, leading to internal differentiation and patterns of relationship of stakeholders or governments. And the other scholar said, Richard Scott said, the structure means that internal organizational structure, such as those elements defining the division of labor, structural differentiation, including occupational and role specialization, also departmentalization and multi-divisional forms, and those relating to coordination and control of work. So sometimes it's related to formalization, hierarchy, centralization, and various other structures. And then do public organizations have distinctive characteristics compared to others, maybe private sector? Some people said, of course, there are some distinctive characteristics because government bureaucracies have more elaborate centralized hierarchy internally, and also they have some organization theory to express this characteristic, focusing on the government size, environment complexity, technology, and other factors affecting their decision making and structure. So based on this characteristic, the one of the scholars, Bolman and Deal, in 2003, he mentioned that the structure form have some characteristic to enhance or constrain what organizations can accomplish. So there are two different classes of structure, generally vertical coordination and horizontal coordination. So more specifically here, so they are also mentioned the structural assumptions. So basically organizations exist to achieve their goals and objectives, maybe to meet the citizens' needs. And organization increase efficiency and enhance performance through specialization and a clear division of labor internally. And also there are several forms of coordination and control internally. And organizations work best when rationality prevail over personal preferences and extraneous pressure. And also structure must be designed to fit an organization's circumstances. This is very important characteristic because in response to organizational environmental changes, because the public organizations have changed their structure. So I will explain later in more detail with the examples. And also one of the assumptions is that problems and performance gap arise from structural deficiency and can be remedied through analysis and restructuring. That's one of the public manager's strategy in response to the public change or organizational change. So generally, there are three different structural dimensions in more detail: centralization, formalization, and complexity. So you can read the detail by yourself. And there are some origins of the structural perspective. This is very basic concept already addressed in Intro to PA. And just there are more scientific management reforms. So basic concept underlying this theory is design organizations for maximum efficiency. So this perspective was supported by Taylor, Warwick, and Gillig and Fayol in US history. And the main concept is that to try to find the one best way to efficiently perform a task in public organization. So, and another concept made by Max Weber. This is a very famous concept in PA and policy area. Max Weber's bureaucracy. There are several characteristics representing four bureaucracy. There are fixed division of labor, of course hierarchy, a set of rules, and separation of personal from official property and right, and a technical qualification and employment as a primary occupation and long-term career. There's a basic characteristic representing bureaucracy, which means the public organization. And in response to environmental shock and environmental change, there are two different ways of the structural change in public management. So the public managers can enable structure, which means allow the exercise of discretion internally. On the other hand, there's another way to constrain their structure, their own structure, by using mandates, restriction, conditions, something like that. And then according to the author, there are several ways, divisions across external, internal, and constraint enabling. For example, we need to be aware that there are two directions from what those structures are handled down. There can be imposed from within the organization. I would call that an internal structure. And they can come from without the organization from outside, and then we can call on external structure. So when we think about red tape is one of the example representing constraint. So this is a constraining structure. Red tape has been studied quite a bit in PA area. So we have seen numerous attempts to reduce the amount of red tape in government administration, but the fact remains there are for a reason definition as used here in the book. There are rules and regulation and procedure that remain in force entail compliance burden, right? But do not advance legitimate purposes the rules were intended to serve under. So can to constrain. So this primary has to be followed in spite of the fact it may not bring about the desired result. So we have constraining, enabling, and we have internal and external. Think about difference between external and external structure primarily. So here, internal structure constraints are those that are drafted by the agency itself. So it worked for the United States Department of Agriculture. So they developed a set of administrative regulations to govern the action of the employees in their agency. Their medicine internal constraint structure is developed internally. On the other hand, if the Congress passes a law or the President presses an executive order, So that constraint certain roles for certain activity can employ something in their organization that would be an external constraint. The same thing but applying for the enabling structural elements, they can be internally, can be extreme. But the point is that the source can be identified. It should be we are trying to map in developing understand organizational structure. And also there are enabling external, internal factors, and I hope you read by yourself. And next, again, to wrap up what is structure. So according to the author, the structure means a formal and lawful delegations of authority and specific responsibility to designated officials and organizations to take actions on behalf of policy and program objectives. So whether this formal authority is delegated from sources external or internal to the organization, it may either constrain the actions and decisions of public managers, or they can enable their exercise of discretion within defined limit. We already look at the table. 2 times 2, this means about the structure looks like. So when we think about the detail, the structure in the context of constraining dimension, the constraining structures may control the options or actions of public managers. So they may provide managers with potentially powerful tools to control the options because they need to constrain something, right? Internally, the structure, or actions or actors over whom the managers themselves have authority. So there are some tools to constrain control the structure. They can use their position and task, or they can use budget limit, and personal policy and contract, or they can use network. So this is about the example about the positions and tasks. The first example. This is an example presenting the ranks and position in one public organization. When you think about my situation, assuming I'm an instructor at the Spark Rutgers University, maybe I'm a line position at the university, right? So a step position in my organization. But on the other hand, indirectly involved, that is, they don't have direct role to play in the production of the output. So maybe the positive way the university teaching, learning, research, those are the general output. As a professor or instructor, I conduct research, publish articles, something like that. So each class is that brings about student learning because I'm the line position. That's what I expected to do at my positions, and that's my tasks. So when you read yourself, you will figure it out the detail, and then again positions and tasks. So basically positions means the structural feature that directly affect working relationship within the organization. So they are highly interdependent, and their formal structure determines or closely corresponds with how work actually gets done in the organization. So there are two different type of the characteristic representing position and tasks. In terms of tightly coupled organization, which means that like this chart, there are reflection how works get done that work for you. Look at the chart, right? There's followed on arrows in this chart and exactly past that works tasks as it moved in the organization. That's about titled coupled organization. But on the other hand, an organization they doesn't fit the characteristic. So which is we can look at the chart and not determine how the organization works, not determine the path as is taken in the production of goods and services. So this is its depiction of structure, but now how work actually gets done within the structure that we can call a loosely coupled organization. And now I want to explain just one famous theory in PA field. This is contingence theory. I want to explain some detail about this theory because I think this is related to the structural dimension of public organization. So as you may know, and in today's uncertain and complex environments, we cannot predict exactly what could happen tomorrow or a few hours or a few minutes, right? So the best way to speculate or forecast the environmental change or cases might be using evidence, previous data, best practices, or relevant information that previously used or happened in the history. But according to this theory, there are a little bit different perspective. So the main concept underlying this theory is that there's no one best way or no one most appropriate way for all public organizations to structure or organize their positions and tasks. So in order to obtain scarce resources effectively in our environment, the best fitting organizational structure depending on the context the organization faces. For example, tasks, goals, and size and communication and decision making. So there are two different type of the organization's structure. So according to this theory, in stable, certain environment, organization with traditional, simple, homogeneous, and hierarchical structure can survive only. So in this organization, the environment should be stable, communication hierarchical, obviously, and structure is very bureaucratic, formalized, and decision making also centralized, and tasks maybe seem to be very clear and specialized. But on the other hand, under unstable and more complex and uncertain environment, the organization tend to have more flexible, organic, decentralized, differentiated subunits to respond to the changing environment. So more specifically, the environment might be turbulence, the communication is more horizontal, the structure, the main concept of this chapter, network and more flexible and decision making might be decentralized and task is less clear and frequent change. This is the two different distinctive characteristic of the organization in the context of the structure in response to organizational change and environmental change. In more detailed position and tasks, the in the textbook they mentioned the street level bureaucracy. So in practice, in our reality, we can see there are many different levels street level bureaucracy. So for example, emergency management system, firefighter, or the post officer and public work employees, they are called as street level bureaucrats. So again, it means that the people who implement policies or deliver services at the front lines. So where public employees and their agents directly engage citizens more closely in the context of distance. So there are differences between manager and street level bureaucracy. You can read by yourself. And then again, the Lipsky, he's one of the scholar in PA field. He also mentioned that street level bureaucrats can make policy because they can exercise wide discretion. Discretion is the main thing in decision about citizens with whom they interact, and their individual actions add up to agents' behavior, also counted, and their roles are built upon two facets of their positions. Again, they have a higher degree of discretion in their implementation of public policy, and also they have relative autonomy from organizational authority. That's the main key concepts. And more specific, there are two different types again, discretion, relative autonomy, characteristic of street level bureaucracy. So I hope I need you with yourself. And then again, another tool to, to constrain the structure internally, which is management capacity. So one of the scholars, Graham Donahue, they mentioned that management capacity can be defined as the necessary condition for managing, achieving effective policy implementation. And basically four different types of management capacity. First one is financial management capacity. Second one is human resource management capacity. And third one, information technology management capacity. And also capital, maybe human capital or finance. That might be broader concept, capital management. And also there are four levels representing management capacity. First one is the character of the government management system might be have the level and the nature of leadership emphasis, and they also have the degree of integration and integration across its management system, and their character may be depending on the extent to which it managed for the result. So main concept is that effective management depends not only on the existence of the positions and tasks maybe, and but also their relation through four levels. I'm sorry, there should be levels. And another main tool to constrain structures, obviously, there are budgets. It means that by allotting financial resources to program any project or initiative and functions, budgets are very important. Budgets are constraining structure, of course, that convey priorities of budget maker in the form of resource constraint and rules for their use. And so this is the very powerful tool to constrain structure. So before turning to another aspect, we can think about what is budget. So budget means that documents or description, explanation, preferences of the citizens' needs and public policy or public program. So budget acts as an general plan to allocate resources and balance between revenue and expenditure, of course, and there can be as an operational guide for each department or each program in all levels of government for the fiscal year. And they can be a political tool to decide policy of who to tax or how to spend money, right? And also they can be a policy to prioritize among competing interests. And also they can be a task list to show what to do, what by what are already agreed upon. And so there can be a tool for evaluation, performance, and communication. So this is the powerful tool again. To constrain the structure, the another tool is about personnel policies. So of course, you may remember that I made some examples last week. Performance-based payment. This is performance merit pay system. So for explaining the isomorphism institutional theory, I already mentioned it briefly. So main idea is that linking individual performance to their financial rewards. So this is one of the example representing personal policy, which means constraint structure internally in human resource system, right? And in addition to this one, and there's last, I think the constraint structure, another tools means construct and network. These are main strategy of public managers to exercise in response to the organizational change. So these days, these two concepts is hot topic in PE field. So contract means that basically an agreement between actors with mutual interest that encourage the sort of actions each is to take. Any payments that might flow from one to another, maybe from government to contractor, the rules and procedure they will use to decide matter in the future in the behavior that each might expect from the others. But networks is more flexible concept. So this is about the way of coordinating largely autonomous actors, stakeholders without either markets and hierarchies. So based on these two concepts, I want to explain some theories widely cited in PA field. One of them is about resource-dependent theory. The main assumption is that no organization is able to generate all various necessary resources by themselves. So they and public managers should make their own decision whether if they can adapt to environment or they can modify their environment, which means their structure. So there are some strategic choices in the context of structural dimension. They can make some bargaining, cooptation, joint venture, and strategic alliance and association. The main concept is that the organization will team up with others in the context of the structural dimension for obtaining resources from their environment. So these are Gregory scholar studying collaboration and networking in PA field. They mentioned that there are several different activities to make network in the relationship with others. So this is basic concept to constrain structure internally and externally. Maybe here I can explain one example representing resource exchange. So when you think about the George Washington Bridge, because that bridge is connected between New York City and New Jersey, right? So this is the one example for representing resource exchange because the toll fee collected by commuters can be one shared revenue in state and local government. So this is the one of the example collaborative activity to change their structure. And also when we think about the information sharing here, the collaboration in disaster responses and emergency management. So few weeks we have amazing snowing disaster. So New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, and Rhode Island, they watch the snowstorm change and they monitor their progress and then help together to recover the snow disaster by information seeking and information sharing. This is the example in practice. And another theory I want to explain here, transaction cost theory. This concept is very related to the contract. So transaction cost theory is widely known in the PA field to explain why and how public organizations tend to save their money, management cost. So like the resource dependent theory, previous one, the transaction cost theory also posits that organizations do not have all the necessary resources to produce their products by themselves. So which means they need some strategies. So according to this theory, managing and organizing some functions, producing necessary goods and services entail the cost. So to reduce this cost, they have make some strategy using contracting out. So this is the example. So in practice, in our reality, we can see that the snow shoveling, snow removing, and then construction and garbage pickup and sanitation, something like that, they can be effort to minimize the management cost in the public sector, right? So they all the example representing contracting out. So, and then next, organization environment and structure. I already mentioned that in response to the organization environment and environmental shock, the public organization and manager need to change their structure depending on the complexity here and depending on the environmental stability. So you can read by yourself. The main concept is that the manager and public organization should change their structure to fit with the environment. So to wrap up why restructure, why we need the structure change. So of course there are environmental shift and the technology change, IT, and organization grow, and then leadership change. Those factors are main cause to restructure in public organization. So the main concept we need to know the government again can be a value creating sector. All their restructuring and changing the organization can be exercised in the boundary of the creating public value or protecting public value. I already mentioned it in the previous classes because the public management is basically meaning with this concept the process of ensuring the allocation and use of resources available to the government and directing toward the achievement of lawful public policy goals. So public managers need adaptability of their own discretion of organization in response to these changing circumstances. I'm going to briefly explain Bonihan's article. The main concept of this article is about the recent government reforms to make the government more result-oriented. For example, performance-based budgeting, performance management, and management for result. They assume that the managers will use performance information to make their decision making. But the thing is, during that time, they have failed to incorporate, you know, information sharing and information learning, organizational learning in their decision making. So here the cases, here are the cases from two states, Virginia and Vermont. They show us that the single and double group learning, which is one of the two characteristics representing organizational learning, and the importance of two they frequently neglect the aspect of organizational learning again, and then role of organization culture in the progress. So these two concepts are main important aspects to proceed their task, but they neglected these two concepts. So linking relation learning theory and managing the result. Basically, one report of GAO reported that as GPRA, maybe you know that in 1993, the GPRA was implemented between 1997 and 2000 maybe, and the percentage of managers using performance information declined significantly. So even though they adopted the organizational learning to use the performance information, but the thing is, as time changes, they didn't consider the concept in their decision making. So we need to again try to link the organizational learning to manage the result. There are two different concepts, single group learning and double group learning. I hope you read by yourself. So here learning is based on shared experience, norms, and understanding that foster intelligent behavior. So focus on structure is not the only characteristic shared by organizational learning mechanisms and managing for the result. So which means the change of structure is not enough to make strategy and make something meaningfully. So this paper argued that the designers of managing for result system need to take routines that consider and discuss data, which means learning forums, as seriously as they do the routines that collected and disseminate data among stakeholders. And so departmental leadership group was able to engage in double group learning because of the culture of openness and experimentation. So that's the main concept what I addressed in this article. Again, organizational learning mechanisms are important. They can be defined as the institutional structure and procedural arrangements that allow organization to systematically collect, analyze, store, disseminate, and use information that is relevant to the effectiveness of the organization. So culture, structure, again, these two concepts should interact each other in managing for results. And also that can be related to the concept double group learning, and also the public manager need to think about incorporate learning forums in their decision making as a routine basis in their position and tasks. So that's the main concept. So today's discussion questions, I hope you find one file named the case of vanishing volunteers. So today the question should be answered by next Thursday. And before wrapping up this class, I want to briefly explain the case overview. Okay, its case is written by Harani. The main concept is that there's one parks and recreation department in a large city. So old director has run successfully his own voluntary program for the department. So for example, if anyone simply find in a roster with their names of people who called in, they had a chance to talk to director and then choose a role, and then they can run their role in the program easily. So he had a network of friends throughout the county, volunteer coaches, teachers, and assistants in the recreation program in the area of art, music, dance, exercises. But now he's retired. That's the thing. So after that new director was hired, she's young and new to the county, but she had previous experience, working experience, and she had training with the master degree, and she had the administrative skills. And that the thing is, the county is under increasing financial pressure because there's lack of grants. So under the control by strong oversight came up, and the organization management needed to be improved. So she felt concerned about the rules of voluntary programs. So based on her experience, she made up new policies, the requirements that volunteers will need to sign up a waiver of liability and to sign statements they will follow a drug-free policy and avoid sexual harassment, something like that. So in this situation, volunteers were asked to take training program which is paid as well. So a lot of course, distrust and anger came to the new director, but she refused to take, took a phone, take a phone to communicate with these volunteers. And of course, there are too many red tape, and so that's the main concept. So as time goes on, it might be getting worse. So the assuming that she had called in your group assist her in improving this voluntary program, you may suggest something in the context of structural dimension. So that's the about the question. So there's tip, read some examples of concepts in actions carefully in the textbook. So think about that. Given the situation of her department and her county, make some suggestions as much as you can in the context of structural change and structural management. These are main concepts I want you to write down. So thank you.